NBA star LeBron James blunders on Hong Kong, while U.S. lawmakers pass landmark legislation. And who is driving the violence in Hong Kong? This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China News headlines. Hong Kong, the city version of the "This is fine" dog. Protests have continued there for 131 days. Hong Kongers are upset about the Chinese Communist Party trying to annihilate their freedoms, and how the Hong Kong government and police force are being pawns of the Communist Party, and definitely the police brutality. And pro-democracy legislators made very clear what they think about Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam at her annual policy address this week.
Hong Kong's protests moved inside the city's legislature on Wednesday. The city's least popular post-colonial leader had her annual policy address adjourned after some lawmakers stood on desks, chanted protest slogans, and held up banners of Carrie Lam with blood on her hands.
Hey, that's Tanya Chan. I just interviewed her. I'm glad to see she's doing well. The lawmakers were also chanting the popular slogan, 5 demands, not one less. The protesters have 5 demands of the Hong Kong government, including an investigation into police brutality. Carrie Lam had to cancel her speech and do a pre-recorded broadcast later in the day, but don't feel too bad for her. Feel bad for Jimmy Sham. He's the head of the Civil Human Rights Front. They're an umbrella group that's organized some of the biggest rallies over the past few months, including this one from June 16th, with 2 million people in a city of only 7 million. The Civil Human Rights Front has always made a point of keeping their rallies and marches peaceful and non-violent, something the 4 men who attacked Jimmy Sham with hammers clearly do not value. That was the second attack on him in less than 2 months. And do you know what Jimmy Sham said as they put him in the ambulance? 5 demands, not one less. Sham had head wounds and is still in the hospital, but he's going to be okay. Meanwhile, the Civil Human Rights Front is planning another march on Sunday, for which they posted this upbeat slogan, "You can't kill us all." Historically speaking, that hasn't stopped the Communist Party from trying. Of course, the protests in Hong Kong have caught the attention of the American public as well, especially thanks to the NBA. Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey tweeted this image supporting the Hong Kong protests. And then the entire NBA attacked him, because the NBA has $4 billion on the line in China. And the Lakers and Brooklyn Nets were also about to play an exhibition game there. Just as the controversy was dying down, LeBron James also criticized the original tweet.
We all talk about this freedom of speech. Yes, we all do have freedom of speech, but at times there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others and you're only thinking about yourself. But I believe he wasn't educated on the situation at hand, and he spoke.
Then there was a huge public backlash.
Protesters in Hong Kong burned and trampled his jersey, while here at home, critics piled on. And LeBron James memes are trending on Twitter.
Then LeBron James said that it was very hard for the Lakers in China that week, so Morey should have waited a week to send the tweet. Yes, he's had a difficult week. Meanwhile, the people of Hong Kong enjoyed sunshine and rainbows, and the police handed everyone ice cream. But I personally think we're being too hard on LeBron James. After all, he's single-handedly kept this story in the news, giving more people the chance to learn about what's happening in Hong Kong and how repressive the Chinese regime is. Plus, LeBron has overcome a lot of challenges in his life to get where he is. He truly is an inspiration. I mean, can you imagine how hard it must be to play professional basketball without a spine? Meanwhile, and I can't believe I'm saying this, American politicians have shown that they do have a spine. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. Hong Kong has special trading status with the U.S. It's not treated like the rest of mainland China because supposedly it has the rule of law. But this bill would allow for an annual review to see if Hong Kong's legal system is really autonomous from the rest of China. And if not, the U.S. will take Hong Kong's special trade status away. It would also lay out a process for the president to impose sanctions and travel restrictions on Hong Kong authorities who are responsible for arbitrary detention and torture. And it makes sure that Hong Kongers who have been arrested for protesting would still be able to get visas to the U.S. The House also passed the Protect Hong Kong Act, which would ban the export of things like tear gas to Hong Kong police. Both bills still have to pass the Senate. Carrie Lam was not too excited.
I would like to express extreme regret that the U.S. House of Representatives approved legislation of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act this morning. A foreign government or a foreign parliament is meddling in Hong Kong's internal affair.
Oh, that's cute. She's learned to speak exactly like her masters in Beijing. But there is some good news for Carrie Lam in all this. The Hong Kong people have been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. And technically, she's a Hong Kong people. And don't go anywhere, because after the break, I speak with an expert on China-Hong Kong relations about police brutality. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Joining me today is Kevin Carrico, a lecturer at Monash University. His research focuses on China-Hong Kong relations. Thanks for joining me today, Kevin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So these protests have been going on for over 100 days. How have they sort of changed and evolved over that time?
I think that we've seen a cycle of rising tension, right, and mutual escalation between both, protesters and police. Okay, when I was here, June 12th, the day that really kind of started the current wave of protests.
When the police fired all the tear gas.
It was the day that the extradition bill was supposed to be passed, and people were very eager to surround the Legislative Council to prevent that bill from being passed. What I noticed at the time, I think, was, on the one hand, there was still a very real emphasis on being very, I think, peaceful, very non-provocative in relations with the police, right? And I think there was also a genuine fear, right, of being arrested. And what I think I have observed over this summer, over the past 3 months, is certainly, I think, kind of a cycle of escalation wherein peaceful protest has been met by the police with really disproportionate force. This has led protesters to, in varying ways, fight back, setting up barricades, in some cases even throwing Molotov cocktails or bricks, again, in limited cases. And this has then led to the police just being ever more aggressive and ever more unreasonable and ever more violent. And this, of course, led to the ultimate escalation on National Day, right, when police, after warning that they may have to do this at some point, actually used live rounds on protesters in a situation in which that was, in my opinion, completely unnecessary and a criminal act. But beside, this obvious mutual escalation, the point that really stands out to me is that, sure, regular citizens are scared of the police when they show up,
I certainly am.
Yeah, I mean, people are not scared of the protesters despite the police portraying the protesters as, unlawful hooligans and things like that. When people really get scared is when the police show up. But I feel that I have noticed from June 12th till October 1st, I do feel like protesters are considerably less scared of being arrested, right? Being arrested in a protest used to be such an exceptional, such a rare event in Hong Kong. But over the past 3 months, we've literally seen thousands of people taken in. And on the morning of October 2nd, a total of 96 people appeared in court related to charges of rioting. Now, this kind of massive, expansive police violence and really indiscriminate use of politicized charges against protesters, it's having the opposite effect of what's intended, insofar as it's just making people, first of all, less scared of repercussions, and second of all, more determined to fight back against this.
Well, I know you mentioned that at the beginning these protests were focused on the extradition bill. That doesn't really seem to be the focus anymore.
I think the focus right now is really on demanding some kind of police accountability, right? And this has been, sadly, completely lacking, right?
Carrie Lam keeps back.
Yeah. And I don't know, if Carrie Lam actually has the power, right, to oversee or to, I suppose, require, right, an independent investigation into police behavior.
Well, I don't understand. Hong Kong is under one country, two systems. Shouldn't the Hong Kong government have the authority?
Yes,
is there perhaps some other power?
Yeah. There is another power, right? And
we're not talking about Jesus, are we?
No, we're not. And I think, of course, there's the power to the north, Beijing. I think there's also, the power just a few blocks over from where we're filming at the Wanzai police station. I don't actually know if Carrie Lam has control over the Hong Kong police force anymore at this point. I don't know exactly what her intentions are, okay? But if she actually, for some reason, wanted to have a real independent investigation into police conduct, of course, there's the issue of Beijing. But at a deeper level, I think there's the issue of police here and whether, police are any longer accountable and under the control of the government. And I think we very much saw that on October 1st.
Well, speaking of October 1st, National Day.
Yes.
We were both in Hong Kong on National Day. That's the day that celebrates the communist takeover of China.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you saw that day.
There are always, I think, far too many police at these gatherings. And it's actually when the police arrive, of course, that one begins to see violence, unfortunately. So I participated in the illegal gathering, walking from Causeway Bay all the way over to Central and a little bit beyond. And the protest, despite supposedly being illegal, despite being unauthorized, was very orderly, very peaceful. People walked along the street, voicing, of course, the 5 demands, as well as their discontent with the Hong Kong government, and of course,
way to put it.
Yes, and of course the central government. Then I was in Central as people seemed to be dispersing. When I was walking, at an intersection where, there's like Cartier and Louis Vuitton and things like that, and I was just doing a little window shopping, gonna get a new LV bag, and somebody says to me, "Oh, sir, you better walk a little faster," and I didn't know quite what that meant. That person seemed to be a protester, and then, within a minute, the police had begun, firing tear gas, I believe from inside an MTR station. While the police, escalated their use of force in Central, I made my way over to the Legislative Council building, where at the time a fairly large crowd had gathered, perhaps around 500, 600 people on the street outside the Legislative Council and outside of the PLA barracks. And I made my way out there just as, of course, the police escalated their use of force there. I saw, at the Legislative Council, the police firing tear gas from the top of the Legislative Council building down onto the street, which, of course, I think anybody can understand is not a particularly safe way to fire tear gas.
No, I think that's actually not. You're not supposed to do it like that.
Yeah. I mean, if I stood on top of the Legislative Council building and threw a can of Coke or a bottle, that would be considered dangerous. But for some reason, when the police fire tear gas rounds indiscriminately from the Legislative Council building, this is considered okay. But I was happy to see that at least one tear gas round that I saw seemed to have been picked up by protesters and thrown into what appeared to be the PLA barracks next to the Legislative Council building, to great rounds of applause. So that was, I think, a really important and a wonderful gift for the PRC
for the birthday.
On its 70th birthday. As we dispersed from the road outside of the Legislative Council building, people moved north to Pacific Place, which is near where I'm staying. And I saw, literally thousands of young people just kind of set up on Queensway, just outside of Pacific Place. That was actually the street where I first, really experienced tear gas on June 12th.
Oh,
so
special place for you.
It has a lot of sentimental value for me. I watched actually from above, from the lower block of the High Court, which is just kind of, maybe one level up from the street, as police proceeded down the street with the big goofy water cannon providing them support, and basically just acted like, rabid dogs or, some kind of, angry, pissed off animals, and just sort of charging forward, yelling, pointing their tear gas guns indiscriminately at people. They pointed the tear gas gun, up at me as I was watching.
You probably seemed like a threat.
Yeah, indeed. That's me. Very threatening. As I watched from above. And, if that had happened 3 months ago, I would have thought, oh, well, they're just pointing it up. They're not going to fire it. But at this point in the unfolding of this entire protest movement and the police response to it, I was no longer confident that the police weren't just going to randomly just, shoot a tear gas canister at my head. So I, of course, backed away, kind of ducking down to watch as, the police charged forward, randomly grabbing and beating people, and generally, just acting in a way that I suppose was, kind of a great gift to Beijing on its 70th anniversary, to see that really the Hong Kong police have, just like the PRC police, essentially become just a political tool for the oppression of the people living here.
So did this change how you view the protests or the protesters?
I've always been, to put it lightly, supportive of the protests. I tend to disagree with a number of sort of know-it-alls and other analysts who have claimed that, the protest movement needs to be more moderate, needs to make some kind of compromise. Really, what I saw yesterday, or what I saw on October 1st, really was just pretty straightforward suppression of people's legally guaranteed rights under the basic law, using the most extreme forms of violence, even including firing live rounds into, teenagers' chests. And for that reason, I, certainly feel that I not only, support the protests, but I also support, really any measure, I think, that protesters use at this point to push back against, a violent and repressive regime. So I stepped away from October 1st, moving from a pretty much no judgment zone of protesters to officially no judgment, feeling that whatever happens, it's important for people to continue to fight back against, what I consider a repressive colonial regime by really any means necessary.
So you mentioned the protester who was shot point blank in the chest by a police officer. How do you think that's going to affect the situation?
Well, to put it lightly, I don't think that's going to bring an end to the protests.
No?
No. I know that the police are stupid, and so they think that basically by using live rounds, perhaps they can, scare people away, right? And perhaps people won't come out. Now, the decision to, shoot a high school student at point-blank range in the chest, it's a show of strong force, a show of essentially willingness to do anything to stay in power. But it's also a demonstration of a complete lack of understanding for, or rather complete disregard of, Hong Kong public opinion, insofar as, everyone that I have spoken to is, outraged by and disgusted by this decision to use that kind of live force, particularly when, the policeman involved had, a rubber bullet gun in his other hand, which, I don't know about other people, but if I was in that situation, if I did fear for my life, I would feel more comfortable if I had to, firing a rubber bullet than firing a real bullet into a kid's chest.
It seems like the Hong Kong government, their strategy or their hope has been that eventually the mainstream Hong Kong society will turn against the protesters. But that has not happened. Why is that?
Because the government makes it so easy to be opposed to the government, right? They constantly miscalculate and mismanage. As I said before, if they had withdrawn this bill on June 12th, none of this would have ever happened. If they had shown some basic accountability and done an investigation into police violence after June 12th, this wouldn't have escalated further. But really, basically, their response to this entire protest movement, if we use the metaphor of like a fire building up, the Hong Kong government and the central government's response seems to think that, if we just, pour another canister of gasoline on this, the fire will eventually burn out. But that's, unfortunately not how things work, right? And so, while the government does seem to hope that public opinion will turn against the protesters, every step of the way, every stupid moment of bungling mismanagement just pushes general public opinion ever further away from the Hong Kong government and, of course, the central government that they represent, and leads to new concerns and new demands.
So with the Chinese Communist Party as the ultimate authority in Hong Kong, how do you think these protests will end?
That's the thing. I don't know how this will end. I don't see any way that this will quiet down or slow down. These orthodoxies have kind of faded away in kind of the anger and resentment and disgust of this summer. So that even if, things do eventually quiet down, which is not something I actually see happening anytime soon, but certainly could happen at some point, I think the effects of this will be long-lasting and, inerasable. And I don't really think Chinese rule over Hong Kong will ever be, the same again.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Be safe out there.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, you too.
Thanks.
Thanks.